Like what you're hearing? Check out more Cellar Door Skeptics every week right here on Spreaker and iTunes. Make sure you come back and check out new episodes with your hosts, Christopher Tanner and Chris Hanna. And always, remember, prepare for the revolution.
Walk with me through the cellar door.
The storm is coming, Francis.
A portal to a more skeptical world.
Cellar Door Skeptics begins right now. Prepare for the revolution with your hosts, Christopher Tanner and Chris Hanna.
Welcome back to episode 176. Thank you all so much for joining us. We had a couple of weeks where we had some pre-recorded episodes. Very sorry for that, but my work schedule and Hannah's work schedule just took off. I had a training seminar for 1 week, and the next week I was in Miami. So it was a little harder to get together and coordinate some of that. So we released a pre-recorded episode we did before, as well as we released the actual footage of us discussing, I guess it's not video, right? But it's the audio of us discussing secular parenting at the Michigan Atheist Convention 2 years ago. And I know we're a very more politically and science-based show at this point, but I thought it was a good conversation to allow for us to kind of go back, reflect where we were. You got to hear a lot of origins. You got to hear a lot about, where Hannah and Tanner were at back then. And I know, in today's political climate, people are like, well, hold on a second. Do we really care? But
or maybe they just want a moment.
I really think it's kind of like when we do our episodes where we sit down and talk about our lives and we talk about our loves. We could be talking about MXPX right now, which we've talked about on the show for like 100 times, but we could be talking about those things. And we thought it was a good idea to go back and reflect on an older, discussion that we had, because when we look at things and we look at how we all come together, right? That was a moment that kind of defined Hannah and I as we got to reflect back on how we started our origin story, if you want to call it that. We're not superheroes, but we do have an origin story. And it allows us to kind of reflect back and say, why did I choose Hannah? Why did Hannah choose me? And I think that's very interesting, for anybody that wants to follow the drama of Cellar Door Skeptics, because, while we may not have dragons, we may not be burning cities, we may not be killing off brothers, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, we may not be doing all these different things that Game of Thrones does, but we do have an origin story where we relate. And what's the most important thing?
Friendship, emotional contact.
It's all about
humans.
It's all about how we connect with one another. And you got to hear our connection story and how it's affected our current lives. So
yeah. It was like the first time we did a speech with Michigan Atheists, their convention that we had. We were part of the Atheist Analysis Network at that point, and our speech was not about us in any way, shape, or form. It was essentially about becoming a marketer or becoming a viral manager as best you could for the skeptical and the non-believer community. We talked about how to build your websites, how to expand, and this is the point where you and I were, we were really doing a lot of internet work. I had a whole team of people pushing and growing and talking about all the different pages and the up and coming pages, places where people were hanging out, and the whole trying to match the idea of the religious mandate of get them while they're young, where they, essentially start talking to children early on about things, and there needs to be an an equal push from us. So that's what we talked about the first time we spoke with them, and they enjoyed it, and they realized, how the majority of people who go to these conventions were a little bit older. They realized how far they were from like that cutting edge of technology, and so the second one that we did was the secular parenting one. That was much more personal, and it was us on Cellar Door Skeptics. So it was just, it was us talking about ourselves instead of, pushing the mandate and trying to grow the brand and how to, start competing on the social platforms and everything. So this was a much more enjoyable one because we could talk about ourselves. And it's interesting to hear myself with only the first child out. And now I've got two of these things, and the little one just turned 1, and she took her first steps on Sunday.
Oh, wow. That's crazy, man. Congrats.
I know. Yeah, and so I threw it on Instagram and Facebook with the soundtrack of Laid to Rest from Lamb of God, because her footsteps are right with the downbeat. Like if you check out the video on our Instagram, Cellar Door Skeptics, and also on Twitter at Cellar Door Skep. And then also you can see on our Facebook page, I put the video up on there. It's just, the riff, and there's a tiny little person starting to walk around. So like the secular parenting thing was like talking about all of the great stuff that happened there. So it's just a really enjoyable conversation. And those kinds of things are what we need to talk about, that timeless stuff every once in a while, because you can just get stuck in that endless loop of just fighting about politics. And while everything seems immediate, sometimes these things, they do have a long scope, and it means a lot. But we've been fighting about some of these topics for decades now, and so we don't have to solve it by the 2020 election. We all want to, but sometimes that just talking about life and what's really good as opposed to all the things that are terrible can be a nice push and give us a nice break. So that speech that we had I enjoyed listening to it, just kind of taking a moment and thinking about the stuff that matters.
Exactly. One of the things that does not matter that I wanted to open the show with tonight, because I really just couldn't help myself. And I posted, and I'll be honest, I do not watch this show at all. I don't watch it. It just showed up in my Reddit feed. And there's this show called Morning Joe, right?
It's a good show.
Is it?
A decent show.
Never watched it. It is
Joe Scarborough is like the conservative, but he's like a moderate conservative. Like I would say he's close to something like a traditional American conservative.
Joe Biden?
No, Joe. I can never say his. I'm trying to see if they have a spelling on here because I can never say it. But anyways, he the main is Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski, and she's more liberal and he's the conservative, and he was held up as like a great talking conservative, and he kind of went to the same direction as oh man, I can't remember his name. One of the conservative pundits who basically said, I can't deal with President Trump anymore. Well, Joe's basically, he just hammers on Trump now because he says he's not a Republican. He's a disgusting person. That's what Joe says. So the show is decent. It's not super liberal or super conservative. It's kind of nice to the moderates, which is why it's a morning show. So I will give it some form of respect.
Well, anyway, I guess the morning show made a joke because what does President Trump do all the time? He always takes credit for things that he didn't affect. And, that's the funny thing here is they made a comment about basically, well, the Red Sox won. That's kind of great. I bet Donald Trump, because they went to the White House, I bet Donald Trump will take credit for this. And literally, Trump tweeted out, I don't know, more than like 2 or 3 hours later, has anyone noticed that all the Boston Red Sox have done is win since coming to the White House? And you just go, hold on a second, buddy. Like, not only did you like somewhat rip off the exact same verbiage that this guy from Morning Joe did, you're insanely, taking credit for it. And it's just funny because they called it somebody on the Trump team or Trump himself, one of the two, they claim it was Trump himself watches the show, but somebody saw that and thought that was a good idea to, replicate. And so then there goes a tweet from, Donald Trump where he's like, hey guys, great, episode or great, show, but I'm going to exclude you. And I'm just going to say, I'm the guy that gets to take credit for the Boston Red Sox winning the World Series, or winning the game. And you want to go, hold on a second, buddy. Like, no offense, but the Boston Red Sox winning has nothing to do with it. They went to the White House. Now you're basically saying that you're some sort of a god, or you have some sort of supernatural powers that rub off on people. But you're saying it's from the White House. So does the White House have the power, or does Donald Trump in the White House have the power, or is it just Donald Trump? And how can I not relate you to like a Palpatine, or maybe like that's how I just see him, and maybe it's because I've been dealing with too much Star Wars stuff lately, but like I just kind of see Donald Trump as the dumb Palpatine of the Star Wars universe. It's like, ho guys, look at me and take credit for this, and in reality it's not you, it's all these other people behind you.
He does strange things. The Morning Joe show it's like I said, it's kind of middle of the boat. And Trump does watch an inordinate amount of television, or he has people like reviewing television and feeding him back kind of like one-sided or like summaries or something, because some things just seem to catch his eyes. Like Fox and Friends, we know he's all over that. So Morning Joe, I think, is on the same time as Fox and Friends, so I have a hard time believing. So like he might have seen the tweet and then tongue-in-cheek played with the joke, or maybe he or whoever is in charge of pushing the tweet button now did actually say something goofy like that. But once again, this is a great example of something that's just relatively innocuous and could be nothing, but it also could be like an insanely powerful ego working its way through the system. Like, it's just like, these are things that are just like, I don't know if he should be talking about stuff like that. Like, I really think that the president's tweet, the presidential Twitter, if it's going to be presidential, it should not be his personal. He could have his own personal one where he does his own thing, but like having the POTUS thing, and then on the other end, I personally would love it if our country did not do politics and diplomacy through social media platform. I think they should have something a little bit more professional than all the senators and congressperson and everything else just tweeting their most recent either bash or agreement or attack or bill. Like, why is it on Twitter? It's like, Twitter is this toxic dump anyways. Like, it just I mean, all the politics should migrate to some place that's respectable and mature, because Twitter is not that place. And so like, here's these ridiculous jokes and all this kind of stuff, like way more things that could be talked about a little more serious. But I mean, if this is tongue in cheek and he's playing it, I mean, this isn't bad publicity for him, because people are like, oh, ha ha ha, wait, there's still children in cages in South at the border. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of my point whenever I see this stuff. I was like, yeah, that's kind of stupid. That's kind of ridiculous. There's people being assaulted on a daily basis for the color of the skin, Sikhs for wearing turbans, because the number of people who are aggressively angry at non-Christian whites are attacking Jews and Hindu and Muslims and Sikhs and all the other non-white Christian religions. Those attacks and that kind of hate action has gone up significantly in the last couple of years. Like, those are things that are serious to me. Like, so yeah, I don't know. I don't read Trump's Twitter for a reason. In Morning Joe, I can't believe they called it. That's kind of a crazy thing to actually catch or predict.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
I don't think it's crazy, and we can move on from this in a second, but I don't think it's crazy that they predicted this, because Trump has taken credit for dumb things like this, for people just showing up at the White House, and you just go, no, buddy. I get you believing in God, but I'm pretty sure most religious people don't think the same way you do. Like, oh yeah, we went to a church and something good happened. They think that, but they don't want to think of you in the White House as the same to their God or their religious organization. They just don't. And it's scary if we get to that point. But he's done this before. This is not the same thing. And like, I don't know. I'll be honest. I did not watch John Oliver last night. So who knows? And who knows? Maybe next week he's going to have and now this, where he goes through it all the times Trump has taken credit. And if he doesn't, you and I should be messaging him saying, here's your next segment. Give Cellar Door Skeptics credit for this, because for Christ's sake, if you guys can't pick this up, somebody should be researching the internet and finding every time Trump has taken credit for something that he did not affect. That would be an amazing, and now this segment.
Yeah.
And now,
well, there's also I don't know if it's tongue in cheek or if they're being sarcastic or trolling, but there are people all over Reddit, especially in the Donald subreddit, but I see them in other places as well. They call, instead of the POTUS, the president of the United States, they call him the GOTUS, the God Emperor of the United States. I mean, I don't understand, but I do believe some of them are sincere. I really do. I think some of them are sincere that they want to put him up in the same kind of I don't know, what do they call it in North Korea? It's a divine leadership where the Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, Kim Jong-un they're all divine and they're the same person spiritually, I guess, and like the grandfather is still the leader of the country, even though he's been dead. It's like Hitchens used to say, they're a necrocracy. But like I these kinds of things are places in my mind just simply I could not ever give any one person that much insane like divine power, because like obviously I don't think that could happen or would ever exist, but like it's so crazy that people are putting so much power into someone that they previously probably thought was like, yeah, it's just a rich guy in New York. Now he's the God Emperor of the United States. He's taking credit for American sports teams now.
Yeah, they did well thanks to me. Come to the White House and you'll do well.
Here's some chicken nuggets. Well done, guys.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. It just seems ridiculous, in this. What's more ridiculous though is that it feels like lately states' rights are taking over different avenues of our lives. And, I don't say this lightly because, we want states' rights for certain things. I mean, look, we got legal marijuana in Michigan, for Christ's sake, without having to go to the feds. We're ahead of the feds. States' rights are typically always ahead of the feds. But when you start seeing states' rights go backwards, that's when you kind of go, hold on a second. Why should we be having this conversation now? And where are the people coming out to vote? And the only reason I say this is because we'll just say over the last year to 2 years, we've seen a lot of states' rights start to go against women. And the sad thing is you and I as men can sit here and have this conversation, and in reality, why are we even having a conversation about regulating women's bodies? And it's disgusting because I shouldn't be able to regulate a woman's body. You shouldn't be able to regulate a woman's body, but yet we have certain states that are more conservative and male dominated. And what are they doing? Trying to regulate women's bodies. But what's really disgusting is the most recent, and this is why I wanted to have this conversation, is because there's heartbeat laws that are coming into effect more often. And there was a recent one that has not only just made headlines, is more disgusting than you can even imagine. And I sometimes we sit around and it's kind of funny. There's a guy that we'll have on the show next week that's a conservative that debates why Donald Trump is a great president, right? And he does all these things, and he talks about these things, and he likes to get into debates on my Facebook and Twitter feeds, right? That's his favorite thing in the world. And
I remember when I used to like doing that. I don't have that much energy anymore. I'm just so not gonna do that. Like I don't know if anyone else like mention us on Facebook or Twitter or something. Or you're like, I'm not debating anymore, or are you new into this and you have that initial like. Because when I first started talking online about this kind of stuff, I was full of it. Like I wanted to debate everyone. I don't know. I can't, I don't have I don't have that much drive on that stuff anymore. Like I want to do practical stuff instead of just yelling into the ether.
yeah. And while Roe versus Wade has protected a lot of women, and there will definitely be appeals to this, there will be all sorts of things. It's disgusting that states' rights are all of a sudden now trying to take more of an effect than they ever have in the past. And while I like the states' rights and I like the fact that we get certain avenues, certain things happening more often, what I don't like is the fact that sometimes these ultra-conservative bills come in and then people back them because it's a hot topic or a button issue, right? You know, people say anti-choice and every conservative goes, you know what? I'm pro-life. It's like I say anti-choice and the pro-lifers walk out of the crowd and they're like, no, let's have a conversation about this. I'm not anti-choice. I'm pro-life. Well, hey folks, hey sir, are you supporting more Medicaid, expansion in your state? Oh, silence? You're not? Well, I mean, come on. If you're not supporting Medicaid expansion, you're not supporting single mothers. And, are you supporting, better, more universal health care? Oh, no, that's right. You want the drug companies to tax us more or bill us more. And, you want us to have higher deductibles and all these other things. How are you supporting life other than when it's inside of a woman? And when it's inside of a woman before it's born, and once it's born, we don't want to support it anymore. It's just,
or they want to cut the CHIP program, which is essentially taking care of those poor children. Like, if you're pro-life, you should want to fund the heck out of that because that's going to help the poorest and most needy children in this country. So, for this entire perspective on this thing, this and all of these bills, all of this planning, all of this strategy, in my opinion, this has all been planned since 2014. In 2014, there was a huge draw and drive from the Republican Party and the Tea Party taking over the Senate and the House, essentially making the government useless. And from that very start, people like Mitch McConnell started planning, and they started really, really planning. And they did a very, very good job. They basically prepped this whole setup. They prepped all these bills. They started talking about these things. They built their base. They worked on gerrymandering by having the majority in the Congress and the House, and on a lot of states they had a huge drive in states so they could take over a majority of legislatures in those states. All of that stuff. The reason they did all this stuff is because they started small with the Tea Party drive in 2014, and they built up to the 2016 election. And in that election, they had a pretty good sized win, but more importantly, they won by a minority. And in a lot of states, even though it was Hillary Clinton was winning a lot of presidential bids, the local elections and local politics were still going red. So we, once again, as the Senate and the House since 2016 to 2018, essentially were Republican judges nonstop, just bing, 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 bing. And the Supreme Court, like all of those steps have all been planning for states' rights to oppose abortion. So they've been building up all of the appeals courts. They've been building up the Supreme Court because all these states would pass these ridiculous laws and they would get struck down in the appeals court almost immediately. They've been buffing that up so that those appeals courts are now much, much safer unless they do the appeals courts in California or in New York, which they're not using those. They're using Oklahoma. And so anyways, those places are all of these things that the courts are much more friendly towards that legislation. And now supposedly the Supreme Court, Gorsuch and who's the other one? Gorsuch and the most recent one, the one everybody was yelling about that was really date rapey. Anyways, they both say that they think Roe v. Wade is established law, but it's not to them. I can guarantee it. When push comes to shove, if it's a strong enough situation, they will they will start challenging it hard. And I mean, this is one of the best coordinated systems I've ever seen when it comes to my lifetime of politics. And it's sad to see the Democrats have been so outmaneuvered. But essentially, the Republicans realize the strength of the courts and the strength of gerrymandering, and they have been coordinated and they have been concentrated very well. And they have a smaller, more simplified base as far as the one thing that I guarantee almost every conservative in this country will get behind you with. Like when we went to the Michigan Atheist Convention, they said that. It's like pick one thing the conservatives will get around on. Almost all of them. It would be abortion. And with liberals, states' rights, marijuana laws, abortion, all of these kinds of things, you get different responses from the liberals. And so we've been more all over the place taking care of everything else. And Republicans have really concerted their efforts. And this is the result. This is the fruits of their labor. And there is a chance, I would say, especially in 2020, if it doesn't come out where there's an upset pushing Trump out, I really do think that if there isn't a big rebuke of the Republican conservatives right now, that there will be a serious challenge in the Supreme Court that will support these state laws. I am scared of it, but I am
I don't know, man. I don't know if I agree with you that the Supreme Court's going to actually side. There's actually some discussion about Kavanaugh. Yeah, and why he's not looking forward to this conversation. And in fairness, he's only faced one sort of abortionist challenge in his career.
Down, yeah.
And that's the idea is that I get it. If they have enough of these, eventually one will land and then one will get appealed up. And once it gets appealed up, it can actually go after the Roe versus Wade decision. And I get that, but what's the problem I have with this specific discussion about the heartbeat laws is that it's not just one state. Now we have 4 states, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a couple of different things that kind of factor into here. Once you start banning things at 6 weeks, right, which is what they're talking about, there's a variability period that they don't take into account. So even if we granted them the 6-week period, there's a 2-week period where you don't know specifically when the fetus becomes conceived, and it's not even really a fetus, it's an embryo at that stage, right? Yeah. If we look at the actual medicine and what science says, right, science says the embryo becomes a fetus around 8 to 10 weeks into the pregnancy. So they're already bypassing scientific standards, and that's the scary part here. We're sitting here getting angry because we're violating women's rights, but we're not only just violating women's rights, we're completely disregarding scientific facts and, analysis, in a favor of our favorite religious, concord. And I get disgusted by that. But when we look at these different things, there's that variable of 2 weeks, right? Because of the fact that this 2-week period when a woman could get pregnant and becomes pregnant, you can't pinpoint it directly. So there's a 2-week variable right there. And if they could filter that out, it would go a little bit better to the argument, but they can't. So essentially, because of that, you're cutting 2 weeks out of that 6 weeks. Now you're at a 4-week period. Mm-hmm. Women don't make decisions or understand they're pregnant at 4 weeks almost ever. Like
unless
that's
they're
1 month,
unless they're testing
exactly
all the time. Yeah,
that's 1 month, Ben.
Yeah, some people that are doing it full bore, like they keep track of the dates, they keep track of their ovulations, they have the whole thing all planned out. These are people that they're doing the fertility experiments or any kind of thing that can help boost their fertility or whatever. Like those people, they'll have intercourse, they'll check it, at the end of each week, whatever their rules are. I know there are people that are like that. The number of those people, though, is very small. The number of people that find out they're pregnant is, I don't know at what point, but I know it's way past 6 weeks usually.
Yeah. What else does not happen at 6 weeks? They call it a heartbeat, but the embryo and fetus does not have a heart that's developed. It does not exist. It actually has not become a heart at that period. It also does not have a brain. It doesn't have a neural system. It doesn't have a cardiovascular system. It does not have, a spinal cord, for Christ's sake, or organs. It has none of these things. Not only could it not survive out of the womb, period, at 6 weeks, period, it could not survive out of the womb. There is nothing developed. So even if we just took a base look at science, and again, I don't want to get into a whole abortion debate here. I want to get into a little bit more the actual outcome of what happens if you have a so-called abortion at this point. But if you look at all these things, they're missing every single scientific point that points to the difference between an embryo and a fetus. And nobody can say an embryo is a human. It's not. It will turn into a human if given its gestation time, but it is not a human. A fetus is not a human either. But again, that's a lot harder to argue than an embryo.
Well, their argument is just basically as soon as the sperm meets the egg, that is the beginning of a human, the beginning of a life. I mean, they're going directly to the moment of conception. That was where they would like to do it. They settled on 6 weeks because it's, there's a heartbeat there. The lawyers probably said that's a better chance. This is all strategic and planned. I really think this is, the majority of them would like to see no abortion ever at all. Just not going to have it. Totally illegal. But for their legal case, they're thinking that this is the best way to start it, and then potentially go up to the Supreme Court where it could get passed. You could do the 6 week, and then maybe one of these states will do a outlawing completely and entirely if that 6 week goes through. Like, there's a strategy here, and in the next few years, we're going to see some people pushing the buttons, because that's what it is. The groups of these people, they will push as far as they can, and as soon as they get something, they'll push a little further. They'll push a little further, and they'll go as far as they possibly can. And like you're talking about ignoring the science. These are the same people that say, some people say that the earth is flat, but the majority of these people would say that climate change does not exist. Both of these things have a multitude of scientific evidence, but arguments are not coming from a place of learning. These are emotional arguments. These are appeals to emotion. These are all fallacious arguments, but they know that, and they don't care. I mean, they really don't. It's like we're arguing, apples to oranges there. It's like the science says. They could care less what the science says because this is an emotional argument. So, like, in the end, what it really does come down to is keeping a scientifically literate judicial branch and strategically doing this stuff. And I think the Democrats have left that behind a little bit, and now we're going to see all these pushes. That is what I think is happening. Like, regardless of whether or not you think the argument is good or not, in the end, it's whether or not it can get approved or not. Because, like, I can let people have terrible, horrible ideas, as long as there's a good immune system in our society to essentially inoculate all of our legislative and our judicial branch from making these bad decisions. I think we have a disease right now, and I think that disease might make us susceptible to making really horrible decisions in the near future.
Exactly. It absolutely does that. And the reason it does that, and this is the core of the discussion here, is that, it violates science. You're right. It's the Republicans of the party of the science deniers, and I'll just say it. I don't care. Screw you. If you're a Republican and you don't think that, weigh out every single one of your viewpoints and tell me where the majority of them lie. If 70% of them lie in science denying because you want to be skeptical and have free speech, then go fuck yourself. I'm sorry. Like, at that point, it's no longer about, being honest and intellectual. It's about you have an agenda you want to push across no matter what. And these bills, this specific bill in Georgia, the HB 481, does this. And what it does is it's vague. And the idea here is that they're leaving it vague because the guy calls it a puzzle you have to put together. This is not a puzzle. When you write a law, it should not be a puzzle. When you write a law, it should have a 50-page addendum to it explaining all the different variables. If you haven't gone through that effort to put together the logic behind your law, you're no better than, like, my son and I arguing over one card in a board game where the interpretation can go either way. In a board game, it's just who wins and who loses. Yeah, a little bit of pride gets lost. Yeah, you know what? We might be mad for a little bit because we were wrong. And I'll admit, I was wrong about a card. And, my son called me out and we went to this tournament and all these experts like, yep, Chris is wrong. Fine. I can admit that. You know what that doesn't do? That doesn't violate anybody's, health care. It doesn't violate anybody's, bodily autonomy. It doesn't violate anybody's, personal stances. It doesn't violate a person being able to control their reproductive health in any way, shape, or form. This law is vague enough to allow for people to basically say, hey, we can start criminalizing miscarriages if we don't like the person, right? If you leave that leeway open, that's what's going to happen. Look at it in this terms. If a company wrote a policy that basically said, here's the deal. If you call in sick every day, you'll be fired. You need to be here 80% of your time on salary. If you're not, you have the opportunity to be immediately terminated. And then what would happen is if somebody goes, okay, that's great. No big deal. We're always here. And then somebody goes, well, I want to amend that law. I want to amend it that says, if I can find a justifiable reason why I'm not here, then you can't fire me. And then all of a sudden we get a situation like in Spain where one of the managers doesn't bother to enforce another employee who basically disappeared for, I think it was like 10 or 12 years, didn't even bother to show up to work and got paid for it. Now, he wasn't getting paid a lot, but he just disappeared. And everybody's like, well, look at the government failed here. Well, it's not the government that failed. It's the organization's manager that failed. And anybody finding that employee should also find the manager and then fire him for being a poor manager. When your office sits across from another office and you can't even be bothered to figure out why the employee isn't coming in to work or reporting or having goals or anything, you're just paying him. At some point, you're a poor manager. But if you look at, if we wrote a policy as a company and we did that and we said, okay, hey, we're going to allow for you to make your own excuses why you're not going to come in, at some point you're going to get contested. And then it's going to get into a discussion about, well, hey, I'm a minority, leave me alone. Why would you say these things? You're discriminating against me. You're also going to run into the aspect of where another employee is like, hey, I'm in the majority, you're picking on me just to make an example out of me because you want to run the other spectrum. You're going to also run into an example where, the employee could have a legitimate excuse, but that's not really conductive for that business and is losing the business money. And if we go too far one way, we get one thing. If we go too far the other way, we get another thing. So the problem is because it's so loosely defined as a law, in that situation, the worst is that company loses money. In this situation, the woman loses her bodily autonomy, her life at some point. She could be facing jail time. Depending on the state, she could be facing execution. There's so many things that go into this. Why would you have a law that's so loose? I don't understand.
Well, there is something to be said for a well-written law that's open for interpretation, because if you think about it, just two examples. One, our Constitution is relatively short. It's not that big. It's really well written. It's very smartly done. It is a living document. It's very interpretive. If you look at the UN Charter, it's something like, I don't know, 1,200 pages or something like that. It's a beast. And so there is something that can be said about well-written things that are written with strong philosophical foundations and stuff like that. It's hard to, specifically have things where you're supporting specifics when it comes to abortion, stuff like that. So I would love to see if there was some way to put together some law that would essentially protect women in such a way that would be, as clean and clear as some of the amendments to the Constitution, and let's say the first 10 in the Bill of Rights. That would be awesome. I don't know if we could do that. I think it'll have to be specific and complicated, as you mentioned. One of the things that with this entire thing here is when it comes to the whole abortion thing is what we're seeing now is in the last Pew Foundation in 2018, they said that it was the highest. It was 58% of the American people said that abortion was legal in all or most cases. It's the highest it's been since 1995, when it was at 60%. And then right now, illegal in all or most cases is as low as it's ever been as low as it's been since 95 at 37%. So the majority of the people in this country, more so than really have been in a very long time, I think it's legal in all or most cases, and it's the lowest number of people in a very, very long time since 95 that think that it's illegal in all or most cases. And so what we have here is a decent majority of the people in this country support abortion, support women's rights, and support this as something that should not be as polarizing of a topic in this country. But when it comes to the way we create our representatives in the government, they're not proportionately representing the number of people in the country who display these views. So like, if this was a perfectly statistical country, the number of people in Congress that would support abortion would be roughly 58% of those people. And the number of people who completely and totally hate abortion, the number of those people would be 37. And then the number in between there would be, relatively moderates. That would be people who think it's okay, but not really that good, whatever. But those numbers are not representative. What we have is two extreme broad ends in Congress. And so there are things that need to change as far as our strategic way we do this. So like the people that are in office that are on the conservative end, they want to use this stuff. They want to go full on Machiavellian, might is right. If we're in power, we get to make the decisions. The states' rights when we're in power is the best thing ever. States' rights when we're not in power is the worst thing ever. So like there's a an extreme bias that's happening here, and I don't know the solution to it, but I do know that if you want to change it, like whether or not you disagree with what they're doing, the only way you're going to change it is to play the game better than they have. And we have not been doing this. The abortion and liberals, pro-choice and pro-LGBTQ rights and those kinds of people, we are not seeing their participation. The young people in this country, the participation is not high enough. And this is what happens when you're not involved. You get outmaneuvered. And there's a potentiality that for the next decade or so, we could have an extremely conservative judicial branch that's going to be making these major decisions for all of these states and all these laws that are going to be proposed in the near future, even if there are more liberal people in office. So like there's a long-term benefit to the conservatives in government because of this planning that they've done, and we're going to be seeing these kinds of laws pushing the buttons of our democracy for a long time. Like this is not going away, and this is a big enough issue, and there's enough support in their base where they will keep doing it. They will keep pushing at it until the wall falls. It's kind of like I'm assuming there have been some battles in Game of Thrones where there's an army that just essentially sacrifices tons and tons of its own people to eventually knock down the wall or just climb right over the top of it. Like this is an issue where they would do something like that. This is an issue where Republicans and conservatives would just keep fighting and keep throwing lemmings off the cliff until eventually they make a little bridge to climb over it and take over. Like this is something that's scary, but it's real, and they need, it's a strategic thing. And we need to I think one of two things is either we need to democratize our votes more, making the electoral college a little bit less of a strong thing. But that electoral college doesn't run things in the legislative branch, so we need to work on gerrymandering. Like starts at the local level, get involved. You want to make a change, you want to stop these crappy laws from coming in, get involved. That's really the first thing to do.
Exactly. And yeah, I agree with you. The problem is we need to get out and vote. The problem is we need to get out and stop these things. We need a better balance in between states' rights and non-states' rights.
And representation.
Yeah, exactly. And I agree with you. The logic behind where we're at now almost feels like we're starting to take steps back. And it goes back to who's in office, where we're at, why we have this stuff, and can we fix this? So we can argue about whether Joe Biden's a great candidate or not. We can argue about whether blue, no matter who, is a dumb theory. And we're not going to get into this tonight, but I've had people literally tell me, if you're a blue, no matter who person right now, don't even vote in the primaries. And I'm saying, screw you. I want to vote for, specific candidate A or candidate B. And
my quick save's got somebody that I will probably never vote for, but he's got some awesome stuff to say. So like,
exactly,
that's something that's going to be coming in. I don't know. This is a pretty tough topic. Well, we will definitely talk about partisan politics more as the election nears.
And I agree. If you're disgusted by some of these state laws that are happening, what we need to do now is we need to start motivating people, put some pressure on, and make sure that when it gets up to the Supreme Court, at some point they understand, hey, by the way, we could at some point have a president that proposes term limits for some Supreme Court justices that could immediately disqualify everybody there except for Kavanaugh. Right? Because
and Gorsuch,
and Gorsuch, because they're young people. But at some point that could happen. And I'm just saying is, let's put a little bit better checks and balance system. Let's put a little bit better, life balance, and let's stop trying to restrict women's health access in favor of our personal religious campaign. And that's as much as I'll get into on the abortion debate, because we could spend 4 episodes on this and still not even cover all the territory.
And if you know some women who would like to come on and talk about this, if you are a woman who would like to come in and talk about this, and you know a lot about it, and you have some awesome points, let us know. This would be something that we would love to have more people interact with us on, because once again, we are 2 cis white dudes.
Yep, exactly. If you would like to come on and have a conversation about abortion access and women's rights, whichever side you're on, I'll be happy to have you on. Personally, obviously, we're definitely very pro-choice to a default, but we're open to the conversation. With that being said, I wanted to move on and have a small science segment about dragons.
All right. Yeah.
So Hannah, I came across this article on Reddit, and it's from the Smithsonian, and it's talking about newly discovered bat-like dinosaur creatures, right? And the picture basically shows a hairy dragon. That's what it shows. And like, I get it. Like, the Game of Thrones thing is going on right now. Everybody wants to talk about it, but they're talking about how they've discovered fossils that certain types of dinosaurs may have been able to fly. And when we look at mythology and different things about how people are basically like, oh, dragons existed, this could technically be a way that where people took a certain thing that did exist and kind of, extrapolated on it.
Yeah.
And turned it into a legend. And that's kind of cool for me personally, because when we look at the dinosaur era, and the ability for us to understand whether dragons existed or not, this is amazing, because if dinosaurs did represent a dragon-like version, that's really awesome that, all these different things happen. And guess where they discovered this?
China.
Exactly. Yes, in China. Yeah. It happened in China, and you're like, holy crap. Where does a lot of dragon mythology and different things come from? China. And it's kind of funny because my daughter is obsessed with dragons. She has like these Beanie Baby dragons. I had to go to Miami last week, and I had to come back, and I found like this dragon stuffed animal, and she was super excited, and we called it the ice dragon, even though she's never actually seen Game of Thrones, but we called it an ice dragon because at some point she will watch that, and it's just kind of fun because like all these different dragon references, and she loves dragons. She wears a dragon necklace. She has dragon shirts. Everything. And it's just you
should push her more into the paleontology or something like that, and tell her that like you can see where the idea of dragons possibly came from. We talked about this actually a while ago when it was an exhibit at the Grand Rapids Public Museum. It was the Dragons, Unicorns, and Mermaids exhibit, and it was essentially how a lot of these fantastical things and basic mythology that have been built throughout human culture have fossilized foundations, and some of their foundation mythology, like the Cyclops looked like they found some skulls in medieval prehistoric Greece and Rome and territories and things like that, where they found elephant skulls where it's trunk and nasal passages where it's a giant hole. And so looking at a human skull, the eyes are in the front, so they just immediately thought this was like this giant one-eyed creature, not knowing that the eye holes on that creature were actually on the way off on the side. And so like they had created the Cyclops from that. And so it doesn't surprise me too much that these fossilized things, especially a really well preserved one like the one in this website where you can almost see the membranous structure around the bones. Like, it doesn't surprise me that they would see that this thing is like kind of like a small flying creature that could potentially maybe a baby dragon or something like it. Or seeing large bone structures and large flying. We do know that a lot of dinosaurs flew and pterodactyls and those kind of things. So, I mean, it wouldn't surprise me too much that these fossilized foundations are a basis for stuff like this. This is awesome. It's not discounting anything that dragons are an awesome fantasy story thing. It's cool that maybe somebody found one of these in ancient past and we don't know about it, but that was the I guess the kindling or the starting point for this story. That's awesome.
Yeah. And they talk about how, essentially these are dinosaurs with gliders, right? They're the larger flying squirrel of the modern forest. And it's really cool because they call them, there's a couple of different things, right? They call them pediatrics. I don't know how to say that word, but
I'm going to say it's Amdopteryx.
Or Ambopterodactyx, right? There's technically that, right? But they look very similar to this thing called the Yi. And what's amazing is that the skeletal features have longer forelimbs and hind limbs and fused vertebrae at the end of the tails that likely supported longer feathers, right? And then both of them represent a family of bat-like dinosaurs that could have existed. And I get it, this isn't like 100%, hey, this absolutely happened. But at the exact same time, this is, some very good guess at fossils. And like you said, yeah, maybe I should encourage my daughter to go to paleontology. Maybe it would be like a great thing for her. And then she would be able to invite me down and be like, hey, look, here's the dinosaur that I discovered. And be like, we're going to name this the Fantastic Dinosaur. And I'll be like, oh, it's after me. Thanks, honey. Or she'll be like, it's the Gnome Dinosaur, right? Because that's my pseudonym that I use online all the time. I don't know. But what's really awesome is that this actually, and the science we're at, are able to actually kind of somewhat recreate some of these different things, and it's able to look at the different relatives of this specific species. It's able to look at where and why this could have happened, how it relates to pterodactyls, and it's amazing to say, hey, there was something that was not a dragon, but is closer in relation to dragons than we've ever been before.
Well, like they talk about dragons multiple ways too. Like there are dragons that are like a typical Chinese dragon is like a really long, almost salamandrian body with a wing structure, so it has the ability for sustained flight. And these creatures are gliders in most cases. The pterodactyl, they were flyers. They were able to fly. This creature is more of like a land-based glider. And there are all kinds of reasons, evolutionary speaking, why gliding is a very, very useful tool and a decent transitional space between animals that spend all of their time in and above ground, in trees and above ground, and those types of things. And then also, the trees themselves haven't always been around. In certain environments, they were bigger or smaller. There's all kinds of really cool things as to why these creatures could do what they do. And this is a pretty complete skeleton. In most cases, we're making a lot of educated guesses about the final structure of a fossilized creature. This is a really complete image. If anyone goes to the website, you can see it. I mean, this is almost looks like the Archaeopteryx, like the one of the most famous flying dinosaurs, that the first place where you ever able to see feathers on dinosaurs. Like, these are some really great examples of like complete dinosaurs, and that is another thing that really helps, because there are disagreements and arguments between certain scientists and archaeologists and paleontologists about what the final structure is, how it works, what they were doing, what kind of animal they were, when there's just a few major bones that survive and a lot of the small ones don't. They have to extrapolate and guess. This is a pretty complete one. So we have a decent picture of what this thing looks like. Those are my favorite.
Exactly. Yeah. And I don't know. I've always really genuinely liked dinosaurs,
Yeah,
right?
I know. I remember when we talked about it, you loved the dinosaurs and the dragons that were at that exhibit in Grand Rapids. If that ever comes back, I highly recommend anyone to check it out. There's a dragons, mermaids, and unicorns or something. I can't remember what it was exactly, but it was awesome.
Exactly. And I really do. Those are things that my daughter and I can discuss for hours and hours and hours on end. As we close or come closer to the end of the show, though, there was an article we posted on Facebook earlier this week that talked about drug price fixing. And I thought it was a good conversation that we could have, because there was a suggestion from Facebook where an individual basically said, well, we should allow the free markets and decrease certain regulations and costs to allow for more discussions or more free market, adventures. And I don't disagree with them. And I thought it would be a good conversation, because I think Han and I may not agree 100% on this one. But I think it's a good conversation to have, because we have to find an immediate fix for, price fixing or for what we're paying for pharmaceutical drugs. And I think that has to immediately happen, even if we don't agree that it's the best thing that could happen for society. We have to at least have the conversation where here's our starting point and here's where we're going to get to. I spent a lot of time working on projects, for my organization, and I spent a lot of time going, this is where I want to be, or where the best point of the organization could be. And then when we look at the math and we look at our return on investment and we look at what our capital cost expenditure is and all these other, different variables, we go, if we want to be at the nexus or at the most proficient point, it's going to cost us so much that the benefits will not outweigh the detractors. So we have to start somewhere and then slowly work towards the ultimate goal. And, God does the opposite thing, I think, in religion. He wants to get to the ultimate goal as fast as possible, but then he kills a bunch of people, makes a bunch of stupid laws, and then finally gives you the best outcome possible, and then makes it so elusive you don't know how to find it.
It's a very human thing to do. I find it relatively facetious.
Exactly.
So,
and we look at drug costs, and it's the same way, right? You and I know where we should be going with this. We know what would be the best thing possible, but we can't get there in a capitalistic society that we're in right now.
So I guess in the structure that we have right now, right? So the thing that we have is a relatively moderately regulated capitalism, medical society with, for-profit pharmaceutical industry. Where do you think you would start then on this? So essentially what this is about a 500-page document that has been filed as a lawsuit that essentially says that the CEOs of these large major pharmaceutical companies were going to resorts and to golf outings together, and everybody was kind of divvying up the market and saying, you do this, then we'll do this, and then essentially they were backroom dealing. They were this is the definition of antitrust, is where they or insider trading or any of the other things where it's unethical behavior on the behalf of these large representatives of major industry. And essentially they were all price fixing, and they were cheating the entire system, and they were working together to boost all of their total profits instead of competing against each other. And that's the argument they have. And apparently they have a bunch of evidence. I mean, 500 pages is no joke, but lawyers are very good at filling pages. So don't quote me or hold me to that, because there may be just a bunch of filler and garbage in there. But so far, what they've basically said is that they have evidence to say that these guys are doing this. And so if that's the case, right? These guys are all getting together, and they're, it's a buddy system where they're all saying, let's make a bunch of money and let's cheat this stuff. What are your thoughts or perspectives? Where do you start then? Do you want to just like kill the entire capitalist system, or is there a practical kind of middle place where you're like, okay, in the real world where we live, this is what we would do?
Yeah, I mean, my idea is we completely end the capitalistic endeavor, but that's just me. I mean, like,
medicine should not be for profit
ever. Exactly. Yes, I agree with that, but I don't think that's a reality that you and I live in. And I think if we had enough, people go out and vote, we could get very close to that reality very quickly. But again, there's a thing to be said about, how fast change happens. In society, can you change things 0 to 100 in a year, 2 years, whatever? And we look at those things and understand that it's probably not the best use of our time and resources to change things that quickly, because we don't.
So what's your knee-jerk reaction though? Like, what would be the thing? Okay, this is what I think would help fix this problem immediately. Like, to stop these douchebags from cheating. My
immediate knee-jerk reaction is government regulation and taxation. Yeah. That's my knee-jerk reaction. But when I sit down and actually think about it for more than, let's say a 10 to 15 minutes, and I actually get into the nuance of what politics is, to me, it would be better to figure out how to deregulate and declassify certain types of drugs, allow for a little bit more of a looser, less government regimented, classification schedule, and allow for other companies to not have specific patents, but allow for these patents to be more worldwide, that allows for other people to produce the same type of drug. And the reason I say this, and I'll let you talk in a second, but the reason I say this is because what'll happen is somebody goes, well, I just spent $3 million on research, and I need to make this money back, plus satisfy my shareholders, plus do all these other things. So if we looked at it and we said, well, let's reduce the government regulation a little bit, and then we turn around and say, okay, well, we're not going to tell you can't make all this money, but we're going to say your patent doesn't last as long as it used to. And once it becomes public, you make a smaller portion of that profit. I think you could let a capitalistic market actually start to take over and fund these. What I'm worried about, though, on some extent, is that we do have, nation or worldwide organizations that are taking advantage of this, that are working together a little bit, whether directly or indirectly, they're working together to restrict what could happen and the outcomes of this. And the other thing I think is we should create a higher tax for utilizing, generic government research that we talked about. I think, 2 months ago, we had a conversation 2 months ago about, basically how private organizations uses free information from the government that we funded to make better products. And I think if we higher tax some of that, or created a stipulation where you utilize this information, you pay a stipend for this more often, and then we turn around and allowed for organizations to have a shorter time frame that they can make a high profit on things, you would slowly step into the fact that we would create a lot of more small businesses that would pop up to reduce that cost. So that life-saving insulin may kill people for a year because you can't afford to pay $900 a bottle every month, but within a year versus 7 or 8 years, that same stuff could be manufactured by another company for a lower cost. And in fairness, that's where the capitalistic market has succeeded, especially in manufacturing and production.
Yeah, it's one of runs into the intellectual property. So patents and things like that, we have major issues with only allowing one or a couple people who control that intellectual property to produce something like that insulin or whatever. You definitely run into areas where there's obviously a major social need that's not being met, and there is price goading that's happening, and these people are in danger. That's a serious issue. And so, like, my thought to that is, with the structure that we currently have and the things that we currently use to regulate, obviously this isn't something that would be easy to do, but what I think would be a really, really nice thing that potentially work for not just the medicine industry, but also for other industries as well. There would be a federal cap on CEO or administrative pay, and then as well as corporate profit and dividends. So essentially, like when we have a progressive tax system that says that once you make over $10 million, 90% of the money after that is taxed. All of 90% of anything you make past $10 million. Let's say you make $11 million, $900,000 of that next $1 million after $10 million is going into the government. That's, a progressive tax system, and it slowly works its way up to the very high end. That used to be the way it was. Nowadays, it's nothing like that. And so, what I was thinking is that with the medical area, is that what we could do is if we had a cap on CEO administrative pay and corporate profits and dividends, that would act kind of like that progressive tax system, but it would work in the corporate sector. And so what it would do is that all income beyond that cap, or 90% of that income beyond that cap, or whatever we decided in the end, would be used directly to reduce prescriptions or going to Medicare or Medicaid. So, there would be a limit. Corporate profits can reach a certain percentage, a certain value, a certain total gross level. And once we're past that level, then you're going to start putting money back into the system. One, because of like what you mentioned earlier, we had talked about, is that a lot of that early grant and research stuff is funded through government grants for PhD students and PhD graduate students who are working on the new insulin or whatever. And once they have all of those things, then that stuff gets taken to private sectors. Well, if the private sector was forced to do that initial research, they would want some money back on that. The government funds a lot of those grants, and we don't get, the government itself does the early, incredibly expensive, and often failing research that doesn't produce anything major. But when one thing does hit, when one thing does really go big, there is no royalty system where the government gets part of that. It goes all to the private sector, all to a small group of people who own these pharmaceutical industries. So like mixing a cap of some kind, especially to companies found guilty. Like, let's say if you're found guilty of doing this price fixing, you get a decade of zero profits. Anything you make over your expenses goes back into the government to pay to the people that you screwed, whatever, those kind of punitive things. And then I would say like a progressive system where you would have your money redistributed back into, the economy. That kind of thing, I think is a much harder thing to pass. It would be almost impossible in conservative areas. But I do think that the American people would be like, if given a fully democratic vote, the majority of the people in this country would support basically punishing and capping the ridiculous amounts of total profits that these pharmaceutical industries and their CEOs make, because all of is James Madison talked about the protecting the minority of the opulent minority, essentially the people who had the majority of the land, that if given the opportunity, the people would revolt and redistribute the wealth of the minority. Like they really would. And that is something that he was afraid of. And that's one of the reasons why the United States was structured in such a way that it was when Jefferson was gone, because he definitely would have been doing something different. So like these are the kinds of things that like I would argue in that situation.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I don't know. It's funny because a lot of people, like we have to be careful, right? Because technically speaking, there is a lot of issues with capitalism. But at the same token, if we don't utilize some of the structure we have, how are we going to get there? And again, what's concerning is these industries, and this is what should be concerning to everybody. This is what should be driving everybody to say, hey, we need to stop what we're doing and find a partisan solution. Because these companies are investing millions and billions of dollars, and it's not just one company. It's all these other companies. And I'll be honest, I don't even care about the lawsuit per se. Like I care to the point where I'm glad we're taking care of something, but I don't care who's involved. It doesn't matter to me. To me, if there was one company versus 50 companies, I don't care, because there's a problem. The system's broken. And people are dying because we don't have life-saving medicine. And while you and I are going to both say, hey, how do we make it so that these life-saving medicines are available to everybody? We have to look at the reality and understand where are we at and what can we do. And the problem is, and this is a big problem in the actual the industry of insurance, right? And we've talked about this more than one time, but one of the big problems we see is that certain types of insurance companies are able to be billed more often than other ones. Insurance companies have enough clout to reject things. So, for example, we have a friend who is a psychologist, and he's a personal psychologist, and he hates taking insurance because they can sometimes just randomly decide, we're going to screw with you this week, and we're going to not accept those claims, not pay him. Then he doesn't have money to live. So unless you're a semi-large psychology, organization that you can
just
afford,
a lawyered up.
Yeah.
If you're lawyered up, they have the ability to fight other lawyers.
Yes.
Then you can fight the insurance companies.
That's exactly why this is ridiculous, because we have an insurance issue, and then we also have these same companies saying, well, I could charge whatever the hell I want. And we're saying is, hold on a second, why are we able to do this? And it's what's befuddling to me is that a lot of people want to continue to vote or support these things. And I'm saying is, hey, Joe Biden, or hey, Cooper, or Cory Booker, or anything like that. Like
he is. And he's definitely pro big pharmaceutical. But anyways, one.
You want my vote? You want me to move to a more centrist point of view? Work on figuring out how to reduce healthcare costs, screwing over some of these insurance companies, and making a more open free market for true free market for pharmaceutical companies to compete. Because all I see is monopolies. That's what I see.
There's a in the end, like, it's either whether or not you're willing to enforce antitrust law. And if you're not willing to enforce antitrust law, the only other option you have is, how do you disincentivize cheating? That was my whole argument. When I shared this, I think it was earlier yesterday or today when I shared this whole argument. Is that I was like, well, what would disincentivize? And that's what I asked people. I said, what would disincentivize the people who are doing this kind of behavior? And so, like, one of the guys that he posts on here, I have a couple of people that they give me good feedback from a conservative angle. Steve Packard's this guy's name, and I said how to incentivize the proper behavior of wealthy criminals, and then he said for this severe infraction, with the implication that actually make an example of them with some prison time, not light prison time either. Same with leadership of Boeing. This has surely resulted in more deaths than any serial killer, and this is unacceptable regardless of position and wealth. I agree with that, but the issue is we've talked about this in this country, is that the idea of capital punishment, punitive retribution, right? You killed somebody, we're going to kill you. Eye for an eye, hand for a hand, blah blah blah. And I think while history is littered with eyes for eyes and hands for hands, we do not particularly see much advancement for the dissuasion of that kind of plutocracy, right? So, like, if we see all of these really intense punitive punishments for all this kind of bad behavior, we should see a massive reduction in crime, especially in the times when this was regular. So, like, when there were people being hanged in the streets, let's say in the medieval times, did they have less crime? Not particularly. Why? Because poverty and food, basically malnourishment, drives you to a life of crime to survive. And so, like, there's a variety of issues and things that make people on the lower end of the spectrum do bad things because they're just trying to make it. Now, the other end of this is that people who do bad things and white collar crime, we've been seeing this with the Trump administration, is that all of the guys, like, I mean, they've been pleading guilty throughout the entirety of their Manafort fiasco and all that kind of stuff. They get a little bit of 3-4 years of prison. Meanwhile, someone get caught with 10 pounds of marijuana gets 1,000 years, and some ridiculously horrible thing. In the end, I understand, but like the punitive measures do not matter. And then also those same punitive measures are absolutely never given into the white collar end of things. And this is white collar, like talking about the Enron executives who cheated and totally screwed thousands of people. None of them went to jail. Talk about GM and Chrysler, who took government bailouts. They canceled on the 401ks. They completely and totally declared bankruptcy they canceled out people's retirement funds, and they took government bailouts. You know what? Everybody in the administrative and CEO package, they got their money, they got their severance packages, they got everything when they left. The little guy who had worked his entire life lost his 401k savings or his pension plans or whatever. That there is that does not disincentivize cheating. You know what I mean? Like, you can drive a company into the ground, screw a whole bunch of people, and you can still survive. The same thing happens in this case, is that these guys who are doing all this cheating, these guys that are essentially being horrible capitalists, if they aren't punitively punished, but not like prison time or whatever, because let's face it, the prison that these guys are going to go to is going to be like Club Med. It's going to be a big safe place where they're going to be completely
Oprah and Snoop Dogg cooking together.
I mean, it'll be like going to, let's say you're in the freshman dorms at a college. You're in a room, but you can kind of go out when you want. You can watch TV if you need to. Food's on the house for the next however many years. Like, the idea of punitive, supermax, these guys would never survive. They would be killed, whatever. I don't care what your argument is there. But in the end, to me, the way you get to people who have tons of money, the way you disincentivize this kind of, cheating is to go after their pocketbooks. Like that Martin Shkreli guy, the guy that screwed over a bunch of the hedge fund guy who was just a total douchebag, who raised like 7,500% on a cancer drug that was like life-saving for some people. That guy got screwed, but he did not get screwed for screwing over people in pharmaceuticals. What he got screwed and he got sent to jail for was because he screwed over a bunch of rich people in a hedge fund. If you want to make a damage or if you want to make a case to stop people who are incredibly rich from doing bad things, attack their pocketbooks. And that's why I said this cap on profits. And then in the end, you could maybe do some kind of, a wage garnishment, like a serious one though, like a really heavy one. If you could punish people that are super rich financially, make them live in a, I don't know, $1,200 Kentwood Grand Rapids apartment complex for the next 5 years, live like a peon that they think we are, live in the real world. I really think that would change behaviors, because that's the thing they're most afraid of, more than like any kind of like, just short-term jail time or whatever. I honestly think that if you take away their fortune, so that if they did their time, came out and they were still uber rich, they would be able to deal with it. But if you said, I'm going to take all your money, they would change. I mean, they would change. It really would. If they could not, okay, life's gonna be miserable for 8 years, but I'm gonna be a rich guy again, and I'll be able to do whatever I want once I'm out. Like, no, you're gonna have a hard time making $100,000 mortgage payment. That's your future. If you keep being a jerk, like if you keep stealing from people, that's your future. You're gonna have a hard time making $100,000 mortgage payment. That would change their world. You're gonna have to get a job at a factory. You're gonna have to get a job working at McDonald's and a secondary job driving Uber, Mr. Billionaire. Like, that would change them, because one of the things I think they fear the most is having to be an average person. That's why I would go after their pocketbooks more than anything else.
I would agree. And I think there's a lot of things that could happen if we do that. I don't know. It is what it is, and I think there's a lot of change that could happen, but
I don't know if there's too many people that would be willing to push it as far as we would like it to go. But yeah.
But even if we could make a little bit of change, I think that we could easily start to change the world and where we're headed with some of this stuff.
A lot of people really hate incrementalism, though. They don't want that huge. I want that instant satisfaction, right? So like the Bernie or bust guys, like I love my Bernie Sanders. I love my intensely progressive candidates. And we'll talk much more about that later on. But like incrementalism does have its persuasions, making small progress over time. That sounds great too. I mean, I would hope that it would go a little faster than that, but I mean, it's scary, and I honestly don't think we're gonna get exactly what you want when it comes to Medicare for all and that kind of stuff. But it'd definitely be a really nice start. So imagine if Medicare for all system hit in, all those insurance companies gone.
Exactly.
Big middleman. So like some of that stuff that could be, if it ever came through in the US, it would be a really nice fast jump in the evolutionary process.
Exactly. Well, as we close the show out, we do our segment we do every week with our quick saves. Every week. And this week, my quick save, and for those of you who have not listened to the show and you're just tuning in, our quick saves are just basically anything that we're working on, anything that we're reading,
something that catches your attention.
Anything that catches our attention, yeah. And normally right now I would say there's only two things that are catching my attention more than what I'm researching for the show. One of them is Game of Thrones, which I'm going to save everybody because I don't want to be this spoiler guy.
But you've been liking it. You have been liking it?
Weirdly enough, I've liked and disliked certain aspects of it. And there's
I've
more to
heard a
come
lot of
once the
criticism.
season has ended.
Okay.
Essentially,
So-
I have we have a friend from another podcast called Not Another Atheist Podcast, right? And they there's a lady that's on there named Jen, and her and I both love Game of Thrones, and you and her co-host Keith do not. And her and I are going to do a couple of small little segments that we'll just release for the fun of it, for everybody to listen to. But we are going to talk about the Game of Thrones thing just because her and I are going to do that. But
yeah.
Tonight, the other thing that I'm working on, or that been obsessed with, is there's this game that's like a dice card collector's game called Star Wars Destiny. And it's made by Fantasy Flight Games. And the reason I say this is because I hated this game at first because I thought it was this big money sink. And I won't lie and say it's not. But
wait a minute, money sink, like you have to buy a whole bunch of stuff for it?
Yeah, kind of, yep. And so how I got into it was I made fun of my stepson for quite a while. I was like, I'm not getting into this. This is basically telling me to collect something and play this game, and I have to collect all these things if I want to be good at it. Whereas I could buy a normal board game for, $30 to $100, and I have a high probability of winning if I'm good at it. This one is a little bit more, you have to collect things to make yourself good. But
how do you collect them? Are they like card packs?
Yes. Yep. Essentially, it's a card pack that is a 5-card pack. You get one card with a dice. Every card that has a dice with it is either a rare or a legendary card. Every other one is either a rare, uncommon, or common card, right? And what you do...
It's like Magic on steroids.
Kind of to some extent with a Star Wars twist. And I like Star Wars. I really do, actually. And so what it was, the whole thing started, I don't know, like 2 months ago, where my stepson really wanted to get the new set. He didn't have the money, but he wanted to return some games and do all this finagling. So we walked into the facility, and the idea is that you can buy what's called a box set, which is 36 booster packs. And if you buy the full box, you have a higher probability of getting like the rare cards. So for example, there's this one card that's worth, I don't know, like $45 or something like that. And a booster set costs you at my store $85. So you get a discount, plus I get my employee, or not my employee, but my membership discount. So I pay $84.15 out the door at my store. And you can buy them on Amazon for, I think, $86.99 if you have a membership. But, either which way, you have to buy a full box if you want the higher probability of getting these legendary or these expensive characters. And there's certain ones that you get that...
So we're talking legendary, like Luke and Han, or are we talking like
it depends.
Other characters in the...
It depends. They could be anything. It's basically the organization decides what's a legendary character, and it decides like so. The female trooper role, Captain Fantasia, or I call her Captain Fantasia because I don't. It's Phantasma, but I call her Captain Fantasia because it pisses my stepson off. Anyway, we if you get her, she's worth $17.99. If you get a Snoke in one of the decks, it's worth $40.25. If you get a Vader, it's worth $50.50 or something like that, right?
Well, that's like the thing. So like when you're playing this thing, like is the perk of it like the worth of the cards, or like you're playing the game? So like for me, like Magic to me, when I was into Magic, was like getting the cards and trying to get one that was worth a bunch of money, and I was like, this is so cool, and then I would like barter it off, we'd trade it. I read like the card the Magic card value magazine that had like all the values in it that was released every month. Like all of that kind of stuff was like, that was all tied in, but you could still just play the game with the cards too. And so like I was like, I'm sick of this like whole trading money thing. I could just enjoy the cards, play the games, and the cards that were worth a bunch of money, they were usually really useful and really like powerful cards. So like it would make you good at the game if you had them. So like in the end with Magic, to me, it was like I had some cool cards, and I would play, and like my good cards, my cool cards, when I would play, because I just play like all generations, just whatever you wanted Magic, instead of like some people who are like specific locked into certain things. Like, so like is this game like where you can just play the dumb game, or do you concentrate more on like collectability? Like
it's both. It's exactly like Magic, man, except for with cards and dice. So it's both. Okay. And the idea is that the game is so diverse. What you're talking about is there's different settings, right? You can play the setting that includes every card ever made. You can play the setting that's the most recent sets, or you can play the cards that are from the most recent set plus that series. And this game is the same way. You can buy into this game for less than $100 and have fun. You probably won't win a lot of tournaments, but like you can have fun.
With friends or something, you can have a good time.
Yes, exactly. Like, we'll put it this way: between my stepson and I, we have enough cards between the two of us to actually hold a full-fledged tournament at our house. That's just how many cards we have.
I came over and you guys just shuffled all of the cards, and everybody got whatever would be a useful number of cards.
Yes and no. Yes and no. You couldn't just shuffle all the cards together because there's dynamics between them. But yes, to your point, could you come over and join us in a game and be competitive against us? Absolutely. We have that many cards.
Cool. That makes it cool.
Yeah. Like my other son doesn't like the game, and we'll find out tomorrow, because tomorrow basically there's a tournament that happens in my town. And the only reason I play this game is because my stepson got into this game because there's enough of a local presence that like he has friends at school that play this, enough of them that there's enough people to get together to make it worth having that playtime every week. And, so my other son, who's not into this, who's normally not here on this day, basically I'm like, you can hang out at home, with your sisters, or you can come with us to this tournament, and I'll pay for you to play the tournament, because the tournament costs $5. It's cheap, like $5 a week for a night of entertainment. That's nothing, Now, I won't lie and say my initial investment wasn't over $300, but I'm kind of crazy, right? I like to collect things, and this is a little bit of an addiction, for me. Is, can I get all the legendaries? Can I get all the rares? Can I beat the guy that's been collecting for 3 years? And so, like tomorrow, for example, I have enough cards now where my goal is to be able to hit the top tier, within the top 4 of our group in under a month. That's my goal. Right, I have a goal. That's my goal. I haven't spent as much money as these other people have. So my goal is to be able to beat them, or be in the top tier without having to do that. And then once I do that, I could just go back to playing for fun. At some point you hit a limit where you don't want to spend that much money, to continue to play. But you're right. Yes, could you come over? My son and I could hold a tournament right now at our house with up to 8 people who have never played or had any other cards. We have enough, resources between the two of us to actually do that. And the idea is that this game is, once you get into it, everybody gives away. So for example, your commons and uncommon cards, like I have 2 bags full of them. If I go to a tournament and there's a guy that's like a casual player, so like if you're like, hey, I only want to spend $30 and buy starter packs, I'm the guy that can give you extra cards and you can play. And that's how I started. Actually, I started by buying 1 box, which was $86 or $84 actually after my discount, right? I started by paying $84 plus $30 for 2 starter sets. And that's cool. It. And when I went to this tournament, everybody was like, hey, got all these extra cards that I don't know what to do with. You want them? And they gave them to me. And then it enhanced my deck. It wasn't the fancy cards, the ones that would put me in the top tier, but it was enough to keep me satisfied and playing for a couple of weeks before I was like, screw it, I'm going to spend some money because I got my tax return and this is coming out of, Trump's budget, not mine. And I'm all for that, right? And so after a while, I got into it and wanted to, do a little bit more diversity. And I'll be honest with you, the draw to this game, there's so much complexity to how you build a deck. It's insane.
All of those games, when it comes to like card games and stuff like that, like they're really smart games. You really do need. There's so much strategy in it. So like that's pretty cool. I remember essentially the Magic stuff was just like there were 2 kinds of people that played it. It's like people that had some cool cards, you would read it and play with friends, and then people who really dove into the strategy and stuff. So like this sounds like it would be both ways, because like the Star Wars universe, like there's a lot of people who have a cursory knowledge essentially of the universe, and then obviously you can read the cards, you can understand essentially what each card does, which would make it fun. I don't know, it sounds like it'd be pretty accessible and pretty applicable to the average person.
It is, and you're right, and that's the draw of it. That's how they get new recruits, and then once you play, you're like,
Disney boy, that's Disney.
Damn it.
That's Disney hooking you up to the main line and getting right into that good vein with that heroin, that black tar Disney. That'll get you up good and hard.
and in fairness, once you spend, let's just say you have an initial investment of $200 or $300, right? Once you spend that,
oh my God.
Once you spend that though, you can play 1 to 2 tournaments every week for 2 to 4 hours for $5. And cool. If you say, hey, this is going to be my game of choice, you can literally entertain yourself for $40 a month on whatever you spend. And then even in that $40 a month, you're going to still continue to get things. Like the one store we go to on Tuesdays, essentially you pay $5. You get a deck of cards, which it retails at $3. You get 1 for entering the tournament. So basically $2 goes to the pool. And then at the end, everybody gets 2 packs, typically 1 to 2 packs. So the minimum you get is 2 packs out of the tournament at $3 a piece, which is $6. So you save $1. And then if there's a big enough group, you get 3 packs minimum, cool. Which is $9. And you save $4. So essentially you're paying $1 for 4 hours of entertainment, whether you win, lose, or draw at this store. It's amazing.
It keeps people coming in, and it's relatively accessible, so kids can play those kinds of games. That's awesome. That's cool as hell. My quick save is not nearly as long and not nearly as complex, but it's kind of cool. So there's this dude named Mike Gravel. Apparently, this guy is running for president. I don't know. He's one of the
I've never heard of him.
People. Yeah, he's one of the 93 people that are running this year in the Democratic Party. He was a senator for Alaska from 1969 to 1981. So this guy's like 1,000 years old, just like a few of the other people in the whole Democratic Party that are running this year. He ran in 2008, and he was a He's now another candidate in 2020. And his basic information that he has, and this is really simple, is he as Alaskan, so he's basically been a part of the oil pipelines and things that have happened in there in 1973. The Trans-Alaska Pipeline, which is the big deal that essentially built up Alaska to a relatively self-sustaining economy. He went through after being defeated in the primary in 1980. He returned to business ventures. His campaign has been relatively low key, and he tried in 2008 to join the Libertarian Party and compete for a presidential nomination there, at complete failure. And then after that, in 2008, he failed on all of these counts, and so he subsequently became an executive for a marijuana products company and continued to speak out about various political issues and candidates. So right there, he has my attention. He announced for 2020. And he's going to be potentially in some of the debates. So look for this guy. His name is Mike Gravel, and he's got a decent old guy mustache and a nice comb over. But one of the things that he has in here, and the reason I linked this YouTube video, is he talks about the dangers. I mean, harsher and more aggressively towards creationism than I've ever seen a candidate that is running for president ever. This little video is him just essentially turning on his computer webcam and just having a little bit of a diatribe against creationism, against people who think that evolution is false. And I mean, it's really nice to see somebody so explicitly talking about the oppressive nature of religion. And so I highly recommend taking a look at this video. He's not going to be somebody who's going to be in major contention, but it's really nice to see a politician saying something this aggressively atheist, even though he may not say he is, and I didn't see anything in his Wikipedia page about his faith or religion. He may be, one of those incognito non-believers that we hear about, and we assume occupy various positions in government, but they could never confirm because they would immediately be kicked out and tarred and feathered. So Mike Gravel, he's got some cool things. I don't think he'll be president, but he sounds like a cool guy to me.
I would agree, and I think it's fun to entertain other candidates and distract us from the monotony of the Democratic Party right now. I mean, for Christ's sake, yeah. Joe Biden goes, "Hey folks, I'm going to join the ring," and everybody's like, "Well, he's a candidate," and you're like, No. He was a horrible person before. Let's not back this horse.
Yeah,
but I don't know what to do. I mean, I'm not going to vote for Trump, so period. And I don't care if you're one of those people that are like,
I would vote for a dirty boot.
Yeah, exactly.
Sitting in a yard than I would over President
Vermin
Trump.
Supreme, right?
Yes.
I mean, Christ's sake.
All the way. Vermin Supreme for president.
Exactly. I'm the same way. Like, I'm sorry. At some point, anything can top Trump that's better than him. If Hitler came back, I would not vote for Hitler. But outside of that...
But would you say his mustache was the worst thing ever?
Yeah, I would. I definitely would. It was awful. And I had a friend that had a Hitler mustache in high school, so I've seen it live on a person of that descent. Nope. I'm sorry. Shocker. But, anything that's slightly better than Trump, I'd almost vote for in a heartbeat. And I'm sorry to say that it's sad that politics get to that, but it is what it is. And I'm not voting Trump. Trump's a horrible person. We have a debate next week where two people to discuss whether Trump's the best person to be president or not. So, I don't know. It is what it is. So, thank you all for joining us tonight on another Cellar Door Skeptics. We had an amazing time getting back to our roots and having passionate political discussions and passionate science discussions. And next week we get to find out how Game of Thrones ends, and I'm sure... there will be. We're going to do something.
Tears.
Something to that. Even if it doesn't include Hannah, because he doesn't give two flying poops about Game of Thrones.
I will. I hope eventually I will see all of these things that I haven't seen yet. But like I never saw Dexter until
I never have
season.
either.
Yeah, I saw it late as heck. Everybody had finished it, so maybe I'll see Game of Thrones.
I'm just saying is maybe I'll give you my access. You can watch the last Game of Thrones, and then we'll have a conversation about it. Maybe
Just
we'll
watch
do that.
the last episode.
Just the last episode,
idea.
no context. Be like, this is my thoughts. This is what I thought was dumb from an outsider perspective. I don't know. I thought it'd be fun. It'd be fun conversation.
This is why Macbeth was better, because only 2 people survived the entirety.
Well, that's kind of what Game of Thrones feels like at this point now, too. So, thank you all so much for joining us in another Cellar Door Skeptics episode. Make sure you go out and subscribe to us. Let us know what you think and tell us how we can do better for the populous community. Thank you all for joining us for another Cellar Door Skeptics. We'll be back next week with another amazing episode. Thank you all and have a great night.
You've been listening to a presentation of Cellar Door Skeptics. Check us out on Spreaker. CellarDoorSkeptics.com.
If you'd like to join the ranks of Patreons and sponsor the show, head over to patreon.com/Cellar Door Skeptics. For less than a 20-ounce soda or an energy drink each week, you can help sponsor us, the hosts, and our charity of choice. Patreon helps Cellar Door Skeptics create better content, become better activists, and it's going to help you stay healthier by drinking 1 less soda or 1 less energy drink each week. Click the link in the notes of the show to sponsor us today, because we bring the discussion with the sources.